Welcome back to everybody. I am having a conversation now with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qatar, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. Your Excellency, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't do this in person as we did last year, but welcome to the forum.
Thank you, Ali, for inviting me today. I'm really glad to have a conversation with you after a year, and I look forward for next year so we can sit together in person.
I look forward to that. We've been asking in the last week or so foreign leaders and ministers of foreign affairs about their response to the U.S. election, and everybody's had something to say. But I think there are a handful of countries where American leadership and American foreign policy is of greater importance than it is to many other countries. And I would say Qatar is one of these countries that you are deeply involved in and to some degree reliant on decisions that America makes, particularly in the Middle East. So I want to start with your response to the U.S. election.
Well, first of all, I think with the U.S. election, the outcome of the election is what the American people are choosing, and we congratulate the new leadership of the country, whether it will be President-elect Joe Biden or President Donald Trump. Our relation with the United States is a strategic partnership that have a strong foundation and have been there now for more than 45 years, which is demonstrated in a lot of forms of partnership, whether it's in defense and security, in economic and business relation, and in the area of education, energy, and the other sectors. With the outcome of the current election, of course, the U.S. policy is not only affecting our region or Qatar, it's affecting the entire globe. And we hope that I'm looking forward to work together with the upcoming administration in order to promote more peace and stability in our region, which is in a real need for it right now with all these tensions around us in the Middle East. And we hope that we will work with them after the transition, and we continue building on our strong partnership, which we have been building over the years. Our relation with the U.S., we don't believe that it will be affected with whoever is the president, because we have built a strong relation within all the institutions of the United States, and our relation is the real institutional partnership and relationship between different departments and different institutions in both countries.
But it was made rocky in the beginning by your neighbors creating alliances with the United States that ended up with a very dangerous blockade for your country. Now that there seems to be some movement in the Middle East, we heard the president's national security advisor telling Steve Clemons just a little while ago that he hopes to get some normalization around the situation having to do with Qatar and the blockade before the inauguration. Is this something you've had discussions about and you believe possible?
Well, we've been discussing this with the President Trump administration for now almost in the last 4 years. Since the blockade started, and we know that we had a bit bumpy start because of some misinformation and miscommunication that happened with the administration, which have been modified at later stage when we clarified all the positions that Qatar has, and we made it very clear that all these accusations being against Qatar were a false accusation and were part of a disinformation and defamation campaign against my country. We appreciate the efforts that carried out by late Prince Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed, the Emir of Kuwait, and now carried also by His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmed, who is continuing the effort of the late Emir of Kuwait, and the continuous support of the US. And we have seen also very strong and significant momentum by the President Trump and his administration, his team, in order to accomplish and to reach a resolution in this crisis. And Qatar have been very open since the beginning for a dialogue which is based on a mutual respect and non-intervention on each other affair and respecting the sovereignty of each country.
Are you concerned that if it doesn't happen before the transition, that it would be different under the Biden administration, or are you satisfied that the Biden administration will straighten these misunderstandings out and resume normal relations with Qatar?
Well, we believe that the desire really need to be driven by the countries who are the parties of the conflict, which is mainly the blockading countries versus Qatar. And we have the desire to find a resolution for a stable GCC in the future, which is needed for this turbulent time in our region. Whether it will end under President Trump or under President Biden, mainly the basis for any solution should be the good intention and good faith of the countries who are the party of the conflict, which Qatar is part of, and we have all the good intention and the good faith to have a constructive engagement with them and to reach to a fair resolution for all the countries. We believe there is no winner out of this crisis, and the only consequence or result of that crisis we have is more instability in our region. If we are serious about our future and about our people, I think we need to put an end and to reach a fair resolution for that crisis. Qatar didn't conduct any hostile activity against the blockading countries, and we are willing, if they have the same willingness to engage on these bases of good faith and good intention, to put an end for this and to reach a fair resolution for our people.
I'm curious about how you feel about these Abrahamic Accords and the deals that this administration has been making with some of your neighbors in the Middle East and with some JCC countries, because at the cornerstone of some of these agreements is a preparedness to sell weaponry and arms to some of your neighbors, mainly to protect against what the United States argues is a major and growing threat from Iran. Your relationship with Iran is very different from that of your immediate neighbors. How does that all play into your thinking about what happens next?
Well, I think the region needs more diplomacy and more diplomatic effort and peaceful effort to resolve these conflicts. And if there is any conflict between the region and Iran, which have been there now for decades between the GCC and Iran, needs to be resolved through a diplomatic resolution. I don't think that the region needs more weapons. More weapons means more instability. It doesn't. We are not saying that you shouldn't build a deterrence forces for your country. You need to build those deterrences, which Qatar is doing the same. But I think we have to invest more in diplomacy and diplomatic resolution with Iran and start to engage more constructively with them. And we have seen there were a lot of efforts in the last year and a half in order to put all parties together to engage. Whether we have seen the initiative of the Iranian, which they call the Hope Initiative. We have seen the initiative of the European for the security of the Gulf and the security of Hormuz Strait. So I think that we need to see more solid vision for the future of our regional security. Regarding the accord and the agreement that UAE and Bahrain have signed with the Israelis for normalization, we have commented from the beginning that Qatar position on that we need to find the core of the issue, the core of the conflict between the region and Israel is the Palestinian issue, and we need to address this at the center of any discussion. The Emirati and the Bahraini decision, it's their own sovereign decision to conduct bilateral relationship, and we don't interfere, and we don't want to comment on this step. I am talking more about the global picture of the Arab region versus Israel. I think it's better to have a united front and to put the interest of the Palestinian people to end the occupation and to recognize the two-state solution and to go back to the borders of 1967 with an independent sovereign state of Palestine, with the capital East Jerusalem, as all the international resolution stating. And this is the solution and the vision that Qatar is looking for. We want to see negotiations happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians to put an end for this conflict, because the Palestinian people, they are the ones who are paying for this conflict.
And your country has actually historically been at the forefront of being able to normalize or at least establish relations with Israel, even when some of your neighbors weren't. But in this particular case, no one actually invited the Palestinians to this discussion. They haven't been involved. And there are some people who are worried about the fact that this moment has passed the Palestinians, passed them by. Because if we are able to have these accords with neighbors, without doing all those things you just mentioned, a two-state solution, East Jerusalem as a capital for the Palestinians, and the 1967 borders, if they're not getting it now, and America is able to make deals between Israel and Arab nations, when will they ever get it?
Well, as I mentioned to you, Ali, earlier, that look, for Qatar, when we established the relationship with Israel back in the 90s, it was the outcome of Madrid conference, which the Palestinians were at the center of that conference, and we took the first step when we have seen there were a hope for peace. And when we didn't see a seriousness from the Israelis to engage in a real negotiation and more toward a resolution with the Palestinian, and they have had the war in 2009 when they started to bombard Gaza. Qatar decided to stop this relationship and to continue on the level of working relationship for the cause of Palestinians. And this is the relationship that Qatar maintained with the Israelis up until today. We have communication and we have relationship with them, but about the things which is concerning the Palestinians. So if there are any issues that related to the Palestinians for our humanitarian aid delivery, for our development projects over there, we have to have this working relationship with the Israelis, and we continue carrying it out in the same manner. From our perspective, we see that there is a huge capital being invested by the Arab country in being a one united front to put, to have the leverage over the Israelis to engage in a negotiation with the Palestinians and to reach a resolution. The division is not in the interest of this capital that we have invested, but at the end, as I told you, we don't like anyone to interfere in our sovereign decision. If Qatar decide on relation with any other country, that's why we wouldn't comment on their sovereign decision. It's up to them at the end of the day to decide what they see better for their countries.
Let's go back to the issue of Iran for a moment. When you look at, when you fly on Qatar Airways, without the Iranian airspace, you'd have a big problem. And the National Security Advisor did talk to Steve Clemons about wanting to see that issue resolved fairly quickly. But when it comes to Iran, Iran has indicated that they think that they will be able to normalize, not normalize, but engage in better relations with the United States as a result of this new administration. There's not been a great deal of success between the Trump administration and Iran. What is your role in that? Because the Abrahamic Accords and the things that are going on right now, as I said, are centered around understanding and looking at Iran as a common enemy to Israel, to the GCC, and to America, looking at Iran as a common enemy. That's not a position you take. It's not one you're likely to take. And despite the fact that you don't want anybody to be involved in your own foreign policy, do you have a role to play amongst the GCC and with America in saying, maybe we can have a different relationship with Iran?
Well, Ali, look, from our perspective, Iran is part of our region, it's part of our fabric. It's a fact, it's a reality, it's there. And no one can change this reality or this fact. We have to agree together between the GCC and Iran to live peacefully side by side and to address all the issues in a civilized manner by dialogue and address those differences and disagreements in that manner. And from Qatar point of view, Qatar is a neighbor with Iran, and we have a common interest together as neighbors. We have, for example, the largest gas field in the world is shared between Qatar and Iran, which is called the North Field in Qatar and the South Pars in Iran. We have our airspace, for example, is blockaded from 3 sides, and the Iranian airspace is crucial for us. And Qatar and the Qatari people appreciated the role that Iran played when the crisis started and the blockade started against Qatar, when they opened for us everything. We want to see a resolution for this conflict. We want to encourage the GCC countries to engage positively and constructively, and we want to encourage as well Iran to engage positively and constructively. It doesn't mean that we are going to resolve everything. For the time being, we have disagreements with Iran in some of the policies. It doesn't mean that we are conflicting with each other. Let us talk about the common things and the common interest, and try to address those disagreements by discussion and constructive engagement and constructive dialogue in order to resolve these disagreements. For the US, we've been encouraging them, whether it was Trump administration or we are going to continue this encouragement for the upcoming administration, that we need to have an engagement with Iran in a positive manner to find a formula that we can coexist and we can live side by side peacefully together. We don't want to see a nuclearization for this region. We don't want to see a race, for a weapon race in our region, and to see more destruction. We want to build on our hopes, on our for our future, for the future of our people, and for the next generation, a peaceful environment. Qatar would play any role if we will be asked to do, if this role will be in the diplomacy. Other than that, we want to avoid any conflict in the region. We have put some initiatives forward even before the blockade in 2015, when His Highness the Emir in the General Assembly, he announced an invitation for dialogue between the GCC and Iran. And at that time, Qatar was the chair of the GCC, but unfortunately, we didn't see much enthusiasm in the GCC to engage. Then, during Obama administration, the US administration has also encouraged the GCC to engage with Iran, and the Iranians sent an invitation for dialogue for the GCC countries, and us and some other countries in the GCC, we were very much in favor to have this engagement with Iran, but unfortunately, some others in the GCC, they didn't want to have such an engagement. I think what we need right now, we need wisdom, we need strategic thinking to have a positive and constructive engagement with Iran, and this wouldn't happen without a united GCC resolving this GCC issue and take a step, and we go and talk together with the Iranian in a constructive manner. The same thing we are going to do with the US, we are going to do with everyone, and with the Iranian, that everyone needs to engage positively with each other. We need to reach to a regional security formula that make each side of the Gulf live peacefully and feel that he is still in the comfort zone and he's not exposing himself to any risk.
You were actually a very big part of that comfort zone, that regional security answer, because of the military relationship that Qatar had with the United States. And when the blockade started, that was a real sense of confusion for a lot of people around the world, that you have this very long established relationship with the United States. There were a lot of people who thought, well, obviously the United States is going to get involved within the first few days of the blockade because of that long-standing relationship in which American troops were stationed in Qatar. How has that relationship been affected, and what does that look like going forward?
Well, this relationship have been now for a very long time. We've been hosting the U.S. troops here in Doha, and even troops from all the countries of the members in the coalition against ISIS. Al-Udeid Air Base has played a critical role in the campaign against ISIS and have been the main hub and the center of command of the global coalition. And we appreciate this relationship that we have with the US, with the defense, with the US military. And I think that this is critical for the stability of the region, and what we see it from our perspective, that promotes stability in the region and countering terrorism and countering all the malign activity. And we want it to remain as a factor of stability and not a factor for instability.
Let me ask you about Afghanistan. One of the things that the National Security Advisor of the United States was talking to Steve Clements about is what looks to be an accelerated schedule to pull U.S. presence out of Afghanistan. Now, again, you are one of these parties where, when it comes to Afghanistan, you have been the table at which the Taliban has sat, the other Afghan leaders have sat, the United States has sat. What's your view about the United States looking to pull out almost entirely from Afghanistan? How do you think that leaves your region?
Well, we don't believe in military solution, Ali. We believe always in diplomacy in all type of conflicts. The war in Afghanistan have been now there for decades. In fact, it started 40 years ago, and the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan was almost now concluding at 20 years. And I think the time come to reach to a diplomatic solution. And if there is any way or any road that will lead to a peaceful resolution in Afghanistan or in anywhere in the world, Qatar will pursue that role and will play any role that Qatar will be asked to do if we will be helpful in that. And this is what we have provided for both for the Afghans and the Americans, whether the government or Taliban and the American. And Qatar have provided them with the platform and with the facilitation in these talks. We see that the steps that have been taken until now between the US and Taliban have been, some good steps for the way forward, but it's really the first step for the peace in Afghanistan, because what's more important and more critical is the peace among the Afghans themselves between the government and Taliban, which is still ongoing. And we are still not seeing much progress in that front, and we will keep pushing for that. So we would rather focus on having a resolution among the Afghans right now, which is our priority. And the US is working very closely with us on that matter. And we hope that we can reach to some progress before we see the drawdown of the forces happening, and we see it before the end of this year, hopefully.
And the drawdown of the forces may be before the end of this year, but what does success in Afghanistan look like? When you talk about peace between the parties in Afghanistan, do you see a stable Afghanistan that has a strong enough government to sustain itself and not be a haven for malign activity?
Well, I think first of all, the malign activities of hosting terrorism or facilitating for them training facilities, and the rest of the terrorism issue has been addressed in the US agreement, and there are proper mechanisms to monitor this agreement. But what we are looking for is a peaceful Afghanistan in the future among the Afghans themselves, where they are agreeing to share power together and to also to exchange the power among them peacefully, and to respect the rule of law, respect the good governance in their country, and build for their future. And I'm 100% certain that all the countries of the international community will support them if they are going to embrace these principles. And this is what Qatar and our partners in the Afghan peace process are pursuing right now.
What role is Qatar playing right now in Syria?
Well, right now in Syria, Qatar is politically we maintain the same position, that we see that justice is needed over there. We have seen that There were war crimes being committed against the Syrian people. There were displaced people. There were refugees everywhere in the world, and they need to resolve the core of the issue, which is the political issue in Syria, and to have a political resolution over there. We continue our efforts in the humanitarian front in Syria. We continue providing shelter, providing schools, providing health care for the Syrian refugees and the internal displaced people over there. And we hope that we see more momentum among the international community to help the Syrian people and to reach to a political resolution over there.
Do you share the view that the momentum from the international community has been lost on Syria? This was the top of the agenda. It almost feels like the conversation we were just having about the Palestinians. It's the top of the agenda for a while, and then it just sort of falls off.
Well, I think that, the momentum being lost a few years ago, not just right now, not just this year. And we have seen that, our main problem in Syria, that there've been a lot of red lines being drawn previously, and all of them being crossed, and there were no accountability after crossing these red lines. And right now, maybe if we see the status of war in Syria have been decreased dramatically, but there is a humanitarian crisis and the humanitarian catastrophe over there in Syria needs to be resolved. So we always keep encouraging the international community to engage in a way to bring justice for the Syrian people, and not to forget the accountability, because the bloodshed in the war in Syria have been significant, and I think that we need, and the Syrian people deserve, to bring those people who committed the war crimes to justice.
When you talk about the international community, is that code for the United States? Is the United States going to be the deciding factor in what ends up happening in Syria?
Actually, Ali, United States is a key player in most of the issues in the world, given its role in the international community, given its status in the Security Council, because the Security Council is the one who is mandated with maintaining peace and stability, peace and security in the world. And the United States and the other P5 members, they have a responsibility to protect the people in Syria, or to protect them elsewhere in the world, in the conflict zones. So I think US and the other P5, they have a responsibility to take in Syria to reach to a resolution. We hope to see also the partners in the conflict in Syria, or whoever side the countries are supporting. We need to engage in a way to find a resolution for the current crisis.
I know that you're a professional diplomat, so you're not going to speak out of school on these things, but the world is looking at the United States right now. They want to know what the new United States is going to look like, because America has taken what was described as an America first position for the last few years. Some people around the world characterize that as America alone. And now there's some possibility of a reshaping of US foreign policy. So not as a critic, because you don't want to give advice to other countries about how they should run their lives. But as I said to you last year, let's pretend there's no cameras here and this is just you and me talking. What's your contribution to the advice for what America's role in the new world should be?
Well, our advice to the US, whether it's with the current administration or with the future administration, will remain the same. We believe that US leadership is needed in the world, is not only needed in our region. We believe that without a strong international leadership that led also by the United States as our traditional ally here in the region, we cannot reach to a resolution that resolve the conflicts in the Arab world. The Arab world have been fragmented, and you have seen the situation and how the people start to become frustrated everywhere in the Arab countries. So I think US can play a very important role. And what we need from the countries to resolve those conflicts, we just need to have the rule of law clear. We have to have a good governance. We have to address the needs of our people and to give them hope for the future. That's what we need in our region. We don't need more weapons. We don't need more war. We need to combat those terrorist and extremist activities that's happening in our region, that's been actually stealing the revolutions of the people and the demands of the people who have been uprose at the beginning of the Arab Spring, asking for their rights, asking for justice for themselves, and asking for a better future for their children. And all these things, all these demands being hijacked by those terrorists just because we didn't unite ourselves behind the demands of the people and support those demands of the people and making sure that's being fulfilled by their government and there is a good governance in place and there is a rule of law in a place.
You speak about the Arab Spring. Who knew that was going to be the beginning of protests around the world? People who feel that they've been left out of either decisions or the spreading of wealth, or that they get the education that they were told they needed and couldn't get the work that they wanted. Ever since the Arab Spring, we've seen movements like that across Europe, in the United Kingdom, even in America. Arguably, the election of Donald Trump and the protest movements of the last year have all been around that. I have to ask you, as Qataris who really were able to shine a light on what was going on through the Middle East, it's always been an uncomfortable relationship because that democracy doesn't exist in Qatar. So what does that look like? I know you think about it a lot in Qatar. How does Qatar emerge into a world in which democracy continues to assert itself?
Well, I think democracy is not, from our perspective, democracy is not a solution that fits all in the same way. And we are not talking about, we are not preaching for democracy as Qatar, because we are not a democratic country, as you mentioned. But the people in Qatar, they are not disfranchised. They are participating in the decision making, and in fact, we are taking steps for more power sharing with our people. And His Highness the Emir just announced that the election for the parliament will happen next year, next October, and will be the first parliamentary election. And we took this transition in a period of decades. It cannot happen in 1 year. You need to prepare the people. You need to prepare to build a strong foundation for this power sharing and strong governance for that power sharing, in order to make sure that the people are participating in the decision making and not just being disfranchised. And I think that what we have done in Qatar is significant. Until now, we have a constitution that voted by the people 20 years ago. We have an implementation for this constitution. We had first started with the elected municipality councils, and now we are concluding with the parliamentary election for next year. We want the good for the people, whether it's through a democracy or a democratic model, or it's through the model that fit the customs and the nature of the country. And what fits us in Qatar is different than what fits you in the United States or what fits the European. And even it's different than what fits the people in Syria or fits the people in Iraq. And what's happening in Iraq is different than what fits the people in America. So every country has its own characteristic. You cannot preach for a model that's been successful in one country and try to advocate for this exactly the same model on other country. In Qatar, we believe this is the system that fits the nature of our society. And we are going to go through it. We are going to test whatever goes right. We are going to work on it and to continue working on it. Whatever goes wrong, we continue improving and we continue reviewing. And this is an ongoing evolution for any country.
You have, as a country, supported democratic movements in Egypt. You've supported democratic movements in Palestine, in Gaza, and you're a student of history and the student of the world. Do you see a continuum in which a place like Qatar and your neighbors become substantially more democratic, or do you think that system just doesn't apply where you are?
Well, what we see in Qatar, what applies from our perspective and from the perspective of the people when they voted for the constitution, is the model of the elected advisory council or the parliament, who will be a part of the decision making in new legislation in Qatar. Things we cannot see that this will suit us for 10 years from now or for 20 years from now. If there are any demands for amendment, it will be seen and tested in the future.
Let me ask you, you brought up a few times that you don't want to see an arms race in your region. I've been amazed in the last 2 months at what looks like an arms race in your region. The weaponry that some of your neighbors are purchasing, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, these F-35s. I mean, some of your neighbors are buying more F-35s than I would think a major country would even need. What do you make of what's happening around you?
Well, this is a clear indication for sense of insecurity and instability in the region, and this is what we want to end by bringing more hope for diplomacy and giving it more chance for the future. And that's why we've been advocating for a regional security framework that ensuring that everybody is living secure in his country for our future and for the future of our people. So I believe that neither Qatar nor any of the country will need to be in an arms race if there is a proper governance in place in the region, a proper regional governance in place in the region to make sure that we can prevent any conflict from happening. As I mentioned at the beginning, there is no harm of building your deterrence, and all of us need to build deterrence for our countries, Qatar or UAE or any other country. They have the right to build their own forces and own deterrence, but we want it to be built as something that maintain our security in a peaceful environment, not maintaining our security in a very turbulent environment like right now.
Let me ask you about international influence in the region. Obviously, we've seen in Russia we've seen in Syria the Russian influence there. When Qatar had the blockade imposed, in a normal world, you would see other major powers like China or Russia try to impose its influence and get in there. Your situation was different because of the remarkably close relationship, including military relationship, that you had with the United States. But as we continue to see instability in the Middle East, what's your view of the role that the United States plays, Russia plays, China plays? How do you see this all evolving?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, Ali, that if there is a strong regional security framework in place, the relationship with all the forces, with all the countries like Russia, United States, and China will be a constructive, friendly relationship. And we don't want to see excesses in our region, because we don't believe that excesses in our region will benefit us or will benefit any of the countries in the region. Especially for us as a small country, we don't want to be a part of any excess in that region. So what we are always encouraging for more regional driven resolution is much better than extending to other international forces. We want to maintain our strong strategic partnership and relationship with the United States. We want to maintain our strategic and trade relationship that we have with China. We want to maintain the same level of relationship with Russia. We want to maintain a good relationship with everybody. We want to be a place where everybody is come and talk to each other and to be united for common goal. We don't want to be a place of differences and disagreements.
I want to ask you about energy, obviously a big topic of conversation for us in the past. We have now an administration likely coming in the United States that is looking to be carbon neutral by 2050. It's a commitment that a lot of countries have made. Natural gas is what everybody talks about as the transitional fuel to getting to a post-carbon world. But how do you think about a post-carbon world? This is obviously something that you've been thinking about a lot in Qatar. What happens to a post-carbon world to a country that is one of the major natural gas suppliers to the world?
Well, I think, first of all, the natural gas that Qatar supplies for the world, Qatar supplies almost 30% of the supplies of the LNG in the world. And we believe that it's part of this transition. And we believe that it serves in the interest of that transition. I think all the countries that relying on energy economy needs to build their plans and for the future, for the post-carbon world. Qatar has conducted this exercise of diversification since 2008 when we launched the Qatar National Vision 2030 to diversify our economy away from the hydrocarbon economy, and we have achieved until now. When we started, we were above 80% relying on hydrocarbon in our GDP. Right now, we are at 50%, and we want to continue building on that model for the future. But also, we cannot neglect that the gas will continue, even in the post-carbon world, very important element in the clean energy, and also a part at the core of our strategy to have our impact on not only in Qatar, but on the world, even through our investments. For example, like for QIA is very much taking this issue very seriously, and its investment to be an impact investor in countries that they are working to achieve this commitment of carbon neutralization. And this have been part of our investments in the past couple of years right now, and we are going to continue expanding on that.
How low can you go? If you've gone from 80 to 50, that's quite a big feat. How low can you go in terms of your GDP dependence on fossil fuels?
Well, our aim from the beginning is to flip it and to have the contribution of the hydrocarbon as minority and the rest of different incomes to be the minority. But this is not a reality right now. It will need time to go into this transition. We built our models in order to minimize as much as possible by 2030, and then post 2030 we will work on new targets for us in the future to make sure that the future generation will not be affected by, the Qatari future generation will not be affected by this carbon-free world.
Final question to you. When you and I talk in a year, hopefully we will have had a vaccine for the coronavirus and we will be able to travel and be in the same place for this conversation. Will the blockade be over, and will you be back in some relationship with your neighbors in the GCC?
Well, we are hopeful that this end, at any moment. And what we need right now is to have a serious engagement in a good faith with the other countries. And this is what Qatar is prepared to do. At any time, they will be ready for this. They will see Qatar ready for this. And as I told you at the beginning, there is no winner out of this crisis, and all of us are losing. And if the crisis will end, all of us will be a winner, and our people will be a winner for the future.
Your Excellency, thank you again for your time. It's a good conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and we appreciate the time you've taken to talk to us today.
Thank you very much, Ali, for hosting me, and I look forward to see you in person soon.
I look forward to that as well.